Thank you so much for coming back. I had indicated that we would start promptly at 10:30. And one of the things I always think about when I'm thinking about being prompt, even with my children and my family, I talk about the seal and how the seal won't be waiting for us at the seal breathing hole, and we need to be showing up in time. However, there's also another concept I want to share, and it's the ability to be able to find solutions when challenges come upon you. And so very quickly, we've changed up the panel members, and I just want to recognize Nivi Snowball from Nunavik Sivunik, as well as Ethan Joseph from Ucluelet Nation, who've just stepped up very quickly. Thank you. So, this morning's panel, Plenary 2, is paving the way for and with our youth. So we're going to be looking at how modern treaties improve the lives of youth, as well as future leaders. How do we ensure youth are part of the future of our modern treaties? What are the youth's understanding and vision about modern treaties and their implementation? What are some of the success stories? And how can we improve things? So we want to tap into youth views on this. And we will start off with a virtual contribution from Taylor Baker, who's joined us. Welcome, Taylor.
Good morning. Thank you, Aluki. Thank you for letting me join virtually today. I'll just start my screen share. Great. So the title of my presentation this morning is In Natsamat, Working Together as One for and with Tsawwassen Youth, Implementing Our Treaty for a Strong Tsawwassen Future. So to begin, Misip Kakwelam, my name is Taylor Baker, and I'm Executive Counselor and a Legislator for Tsawwassen First Nation. I am also a new mother, so that is why I'm joining virtually today. And Tsawwassen, we're a Coast Salish nation on the west coast of BC, and our name translates as land facing the sea. I look forward every year to the LCAC conference and annual leadership meeting, so I'm sad to be not there in person. So a virtual wave to everybody in the audience today. And I'm also proud to be a Tsawwassen youth, although my days of being able to say that are getting short. So when I was reflecting on what I wanted to talk about in this session, I kept coming back to the idea of Natsamat, which means working together as one in our Hunkalminam language. We all know that when we're paddling together in a canoe, we have to be working together. And if people are paddling in different directions, then the canoe won't move and will spin in circles. And I believe it's the same in our community and our governance. We need to work together as one to make sure the future of that we envision for our youth as a reality. But that also means including our young people. It isn't just about the adults working together for our youth, it's working together for and with our youth. And we always say that the youth are our future, but it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that they're also our present. So our treaty, the Tsawwassen Final Agreement, came into effect almost 16 years ago. Our leaders back then wanted a better future for our nation, and the treaty was one of the tools that they created to do that. There are many examples of how the lives of Tsawwassen youth have been improved over the last 16 years, but I also wanted to make a point that it isn't just the treaty. As I mentioned, the treaty is a tool, and I want to raise my hands in respect and gratitude to the elected leaders who have made the Tsawwassen laws, plans, and strategies, and to our leaders who have done the daily work and the daily decisions that breathe life into the vision of our treaty. And I also want to hold my hands up to our community members who continue to engage with our government and shape our evolving vision. Overall, the increase in revenues that TFN has experienced post-treaty has allowed us to fund a significant increase in member programming, especially in education, health, and social services. So in the next few slides, I wanted to share 4 areas where I've seen improvements of our young people. so specifically in education, housing, language, and stewardship. But even though we have so many positives and success stories to talk about, it's also important to acknowledge that we're still healing. Intergenerational trauma and all the harms that my community has faced cannot be erased by words in a treaty or by an effective date, but all this work that we're doing contributes to our healing, and that's something that we need to continue to focus on. So to start, we'll start with education. When I first graduated high school almost 11 years ago, there was far fewer people in my community that were actually partaking in post-secondary education and employment and training programs that compared to today. I remember feeling very nervous about taking that leap into post-secondary myself, and the support from my community and my family made it possible. I remember at the time our chief personally reaching out to me to congratulate me and encourage me when I was accepted into my undergraduate program. And as a young person, hearing that from my nation's leadership, that was incredibly motivating and inspired me to pursue my goals. Our nation has continuously raised the bar of expectations for our children and for our youth. And we know that our people can achieve all their educational and career goals with the right supports. Under our treaty, we now have the jurisdiction and resources to provide supports at all levels of education, from our daycare with growing cultural curriculum to free educational assessments and grants for supplies, school trips and extracurriculars in the kindergarten to grade 12 range, to tuition and living allowances for our post-secondary and education and training students. We also have a brand new youth center, which is shown on the slide, where we can provide a whole range of fun and educational programs for our youth. We celebrate our grads at all levels with a graduation ceremony every year, and I'm so proud that our numbers of graduates and post-secondary attendance is growing every year. So our second example I'd like to talk about is in housing. Through our own land management and partnerships, we've been able to provide a range of housing solutions on our lands to support our youth through the housing crisis felt all across the country. We've recently completed a 36 rental unit development complex that has provided affordable housing for many of our youth and young families, as well as 6 duplexes, which members were able to purchase at construction costs, and 9 out of 12 of those new homeowners were under the age of 30. And we've nearly erased our housing list and have been even able to put significant supports into renovations on member homes and older rental homes on our lands, and have another project for 6 duplexes in our plans for the upcoming year. And finally, through strengthening our land management and enabling us to determine the laws that guide development on our lands, we've been able to do a lot more to ensure that the building environment reflects our language and culture, such as our new stop signs that were implemented recently on our lands. Third is the revitalization of our language. With only one fluent speaker left in our community, revitalizing our language is the utmost importance. I'm proud to share that it is our youth that are driving the revitalization of our language, with language curriculum in the daycare and our youth center, and 6 of our older youth that are getting degrees in our language through a partnership with Simon Fraser University. Our language learners are full-time TFN employees while they study and they work to share the language in many ways with our staff and our community. It is now common to see TFN youth offering prayers in our language to open official meetings and events. And on the screen, you'll see a picture of our Princess Tuasa play, where our culture and language team told the legend of Princess Tuasa fully in Hunkelminum. Finally, revitalizing our language and culture also means revitalizing the stewardship of our lands and waters. Through advancing our own jurisdiction, we're flexing our treaty muscles to improve the local habitats, fighting accumulative flex, and ensuring that there are fish and other traditional foods and medicine that are our future generations. We also make efforts to ensure that our youth have opportunities to work on these projects, such as our annual partnership with Raincoast and jobs at our community farm for our summer student employment program, and by making efforts to pass down traditional knowledge to our youth. So as our future leaders, how is TWASN ensuring that its youth are part of the future of the final agreement? So it's important to question and to ask how that we're ensuring youth are participating. And for me, implementing our final agreement is not separate from governing our community. Everything that we do as a government implements our treaty, and implementing our treaty supports all we do as a nation. And as I mentioned before, it's so important that in Not-Samat, we work together with and for our youth. So the first thing that comes to mind when ensuring the youth voices are included in our everyday governing process and decisions are we do this through engagement, and we have by doing and by having youth seats of the same government committees within our nation. So for example, our Housing Advisory Committee has a lot of youth input and even has an elected seat at the table. We've recently had calls to establish a youth council, and that's something that we're looking into now. Another way that we do this is by providing work experience and employment within our TWASN government. So for example, we have a summer student program, and we hire with preferential hiring practices for our members. So for example, before I was elected, I worked in our TFN Economic Development Corporation as a administrative assistant. And I also worked in our Policy and Intergovernmental Affairs Department as a policy intern over the summers. And it's also important that we continue to expand our efforts related to our language, culture, and traditions. When we strengthen who we are as people, we contribute to the healing and the prosperous future that we want for our people. And we also want to make space for our youth in our elected governance. So for example, pardon me, for example, anyone that can run for legislature starts at 18. And I'm grateful to be an example of how our members are willing to place their trust in a young person at the table. We also have a tradition of the feather runner in our legislature, where we have the youth bring the talking feather around to each speaker, and they listen and learn, and it's been a great way for some of our kids to get involved. But we still have a lot of work to do to build up the relationship between the TFN youth and our treaty. When the treaty was negotiated, there was significant engagement, and most members had a pretty good understanding. But as we shifted into implementation, our focus has been split into so many directions that we've had to do so much building, both metaphorically in our government and literally in our community. We now have a whole generation of youth who have never lived under the Indian Act, and we have a lot more to do to make sure that we're teaching treaty literacy. We've had a few sessions with elected officials and members of the team who negotiated the treaty. And although it went well, we've received feedback from youth that some of the sessions felt more being in a classroom. So our top priority is to continue learning how to use our tools in a way but also aligns with our youth's interests. We also need to make sure that our governance is accessible. That means making space in our institutions for youth, encouraging them to participate, and being welcoming when they do. Youth-specific projects and engagement methods are also important. At TFN, we're starting a large member well-being evaluation project this year. And for the first time, we're actually incorporating a youth component using a photo voice methodology, which allows them to express their ideas through photos and videos. So at the end of the day, what we've learned is that we need to meet our youth where they are, and we need to use methods like video and social media, and maybe even gamify our engagement where we can. We also need to hold youth-only sessions so that they feel comfortable sharing their views in a setting with their peers. For example, our middle photo shared on the screen here. Last summer, we hired 2 youth, TFN youth, to lead an engagement project with their peers. We also need to develop learning materials targeted at various age groups so that they can start to get an idea of the treaty in elementary school and learn more of the technical aspects as they get older. And finally, we need to listen and demonstrate that we heard them by acting on their advice. Youth are insightful, and they can tell when they're truly making a difference. So in closing, I'd like to reiterate that our TWASN youth have so much to gain from the continued implementation of our self-governance, but they also have so much to give today and in our future. We can achieve a better future for all Canadians by working together as one and Not-Samat, with and for our youth. Heichka, for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you so much for joining us, Taylor, virtually, and congratulations on being a new mother. We will now move on. So Taylor's joining us from Tsawwassen, and we're now going to move on to the Clecho government, and I'm going to ask Itwa Scott Enns to speak.
Merci. Si Itwa Scott Enns Clincho got in a got on at it's on the chin the got in a got on at Sombek and Nade. My name's Itwa Scott Enns. I'm the Director of Planning and Partnerships for Clecho Government. I am a descendant of the tree-lying people. I live in Yellowknife, and I have the great honor of working with and for my people at Clecho Government, including in the area of implementation of modern treaties. Before I get started, I just want to be clear that I am not a youth. That ship sailed for me a long time ago, and I have the white hairs and the wrinkles to prove it. But I was asked to come more in the leadership capacity and speak to what it means to be a leader supporting our young people. There's quite a lot of young people here this week, and they are the real experts. They're the ones that we should all be talking to understand how they need to be supported. And so I'm actually going to ask the under 35s, those that identify as a youth, if you're here this week, to raise your hand so we can see all the amazing young people in the room. So I encourage you guys to track down all those beautiful young faces and have some good conversations with them this week, because I'm certain they have good ideas to share. I also want to say that this is actually a really full circle moment for me to be up here at the Land Claims Agreement Coalition Conference, because once upon a time I was a youth and I was a student at the University of Toronto, and I was taking Indigenous Studies and Ethics, Society and Law, and I started getting very interested in land claims and self-government, and so I started writing all my papers on the Clecho Agreement. And before I even knew what LCAC was, I found out there was this whole conference focused on land claims. So I got money from the student union to hop on the train and come over to Ottawa and come to the conference. And I remember seeing Patty Black doing her thing, thinking, wow, her job is to work with land claims. That's so cool. And actually at the conference, I ended up sitting at the table with the former Grand Chief of the Gwich'in Tribal Council, Norman Snowshoe. And we just happened to be sitting at the same table, and he asked who I was, and you know, it's the North is small, so of course he knows my family. And he said, well, what are you doing this week? I said, well, I'm just here. And he said, well, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, I have no plans. And he said, well, you come with us, come with me. We have a leadership meeting tomorrow, and you should come, just listen, observe, and you can come as a guest of the Gwich'in Tribal Council. And so I went the next day with Norman and his staff, and my leaders were also there across the table. But you know, that moment is something that I will never forget, because I sat in on the leadership meeting and I was just in awe, you know, to see all this work that our leaders do and that we do together as governments. And it was such a small, simple moment, I'm sure for him to just invite me to tag along, but actually it had such an impact on me. And the reality is that it's really those little moments and those little opportunities that can really count for young people. The power of education is something that I was just talking to with one of my elders on the break there, Johnny Washi. He just gifted me a really excellent piece of guidance. And he was talking about how important it is that we support our young people to get educations. And I had that privilege of going to university and getting that kind of education. And he said, you know, that's really how we're going to move forward as a people. We need our young people to be educated. And he said, it's just like snowshoes. You put your snowshoes on and you can only move forward. You can't move backwards. You know, one of the things I learned when I was at the University of Toronto was about how to collaborate with others. I think it was one of the biggest lessons I learned leaving the north and my home and my family and going to a big place like Toronto and being amongst students from all over the world was just actually how little people know about us. I come from a large family. You know, the north is small, everyone knows everyone, we all know our family's history back many generations, and to go somewhere where no one knows you, they don't know your family, they don't know your context, they don't know where you come from. It was really a huge culture shock for me, but it really helped me to grow a lot, because from that experience in getting my education and being amongst different perspectives and people's realities and learning others' ideas and experiences, it's really helped me in where I am today, because that's the reality of the work we do implementing modern treaties. It's learning how to work with people who don't know your reality and who come from very different experience, and everyone has something to bring to the table, but we all have to find some common ground. Doing the hard work of implementing modern treaties, it is really hard work. It takes a lot of patience, like I said, because you're working with folks who don't understand you in systems that weren't designed for you. It takes a lot of discipline. It's a long journey. It takes dedication and hard work. And every little piece our governments make together has been at the hands of many people and a lot of really hard work and discipline. And the implementation of our treaties will really only happen if we work together. Each of us have a role to play, no matter where you come from, where you grew up, what your beliefs are. We're all treaty people, and that means that we have to work together. But really, the best education of these values for our young people doesn't come from universities and colleges. It comes from, in my language, we say gonawu, our way of life. Our culture and our way of life is what's going to teach our young people this leadership skills that they need to thrive in these spaces. It'll also help with healing, which Taylor spoke about. But patience, I learned true patience from learning how to sew. When I first started sewing, my beading was terrible. You could see all my threads, my lines were crooked, it was very bumpy. And you know, it just took practice in sewing and sewing more and more again until I was able to bead smooth lines and have my beading be smooth on top. And it's really just through the practice of sewing that I learned what patience really means. From hide tanning, I learned discipline. When you're tanning caribou hides, it doesn't matter how tired you are or what else you have going on in your life. There's a process to follow with hide tanning, and if your hide needs to get wrung out, or if it needs to get scraped, or it needs to get smoked, it has to get done. You can't just leave it for another day because you might ruin your hide. And so you really learn the discipline of hard work through some of our traditional activities like hide tanning. And one of the best lessons we ever will get on how to work together is from being on the land, because that's how our people survive. You have to work together to survive and thrive on the land. And one of the ways we teach that to our young people is through what we call the Trails of Our Ancestors canoe trip. Every year, our people take our canoes out and travel on our traditional trails to our annual gathering, and it's a full 2-week trip out on the land. And I went one year with my 2-year-old, and it is not for the faint of heart. But we take our high school students on that trip, and they get high school credits for doing that. And that is the best way that they're going to learn what it means to work together. And that is exactly the kind of lessons that we need and the leadership values that our young people need to be able to do the hard work of implementing modern treaties. One of the things you also learn on that trip, and I think in all of our traditional activities, is that everyone has something to contribute. You know, everyone has a role. On the canoe trip, you have our kawus that are, you know, the head or the boss of the canoe. And, you know, you have the people who are strong, who can haul the canoes over the portages. You have the people who are good at cooking that help feed everyone. You have the people that, you know, have the traditional knowledge and know exactly where the trails are and where we need to camp. Everyone has a role to play and has something to contribute. And one of the most important things we can do for our Indigenous youth is to support them to learn and explore what they have to contribute, and what it looks like for everyone is going to be different. But to really support them to learn and to explore and to understand for themselves and decide for themselves what their own pathways are. And to do that, they need the opportunities to get an education. They need the opportunities to learn about their culture, their history, their lands, their language, and their way of life. Taylor spoke about the importance of language, and our language really is the heart of who we are. It holds our stories, it holds our place names, it holds our connection to the land is in our language. And without it, I can tell you firsthand that it feels like you're always missing something. You know, I do this work and I am not fluent in my language, I'm still learning. And I always feel like I don't actually have the words to describe what I can feel in my heart, because those words only exist in Clinchoyati, and I'm still learning. Our young people need the language, and one of the things that we can do is really support them to go on those journeys to learning their language. There's lots of language speakers in the room. Share your language with the young people, help them learn. Be generous with passing on that knowledge. But there's also lots of public servants in the room who have important roles to play in the policies that get developed, the laws that get developed, the decisions that get made about how to allocate resources. And so it's really important, I think, for those people to understand the critical urgency of there to be resources for our Indigenous languages. There are nations in this room who have maybe 2 fluent speakers left in their communities, and that can't continue to happen. We really need to put a lot of effort into saving our languages, and for young people, that's a really important part of their identity. When you learn your culture, it's very hands-on experience. You know, you can watch how to cut a fish 100 times, but until you actually pick up the knife and do it yourself, you're not gonna learn. The first time I started cutting fish, it was so rough, I was left with these tiny little scraps that probably you would have saw and thought I was trying to cut up for like stew or soup or something. I was trying to fillet it. But again, it's only through practice and through actually doing it yourself that you get that hands-on experience and get better. And it's only through actually picking up the knife and cutting the fish that you learn, you know, that satisfying noise of cutting through the pin bones and gliding your knife over the ribs. And it's the same for negotiations. You really can only learn by being in the room and sitting at the table and hearing firsthand how it looks and feels to navigate some of the hardest issues, to find common ground across the table from people who maybe started out with not understanding you. And so I really encourage everyone to think about, in the same way that Norman created for me, just those moments of opportunity to be at the table, to listen and to learn in those spaces. Our young people need those opportunities too. We all have a role to play in supporting the creation of those moments and opportunities. And so again, I encourage everyone to go and find a moment this week to talk to the young people in the room. You never know what doors it might open for them, and you also don't know what you might learn from them. And for the young people in the room, I want you to know that you matter. Your voice counts. Take every opportunity you can to learn from your elders, because there's absolutely no substitute for the knowledge and education they have to share with you. We have a saying in our language that means to be strong like 2 people. And it means to be strong in our Clincha way of life, and also to be able to thrive in, you know, the evolving modern society. And that was a phrase, a concept that the late Chief Jimmy Bruno used to talk about, and then the late Elder Elizabeth Mackenzie coined that actual phrase, to be strong like 2 people. And those words come from a vision that our leaders and our elders of the past had about where we needed to go as a people. It was a vision and a dream that they had that our people would be strong and would stay strong in our Clincha way of life, but also that we would thrive and evolve and adapt with the modern times. For the young people in the room, you are their dreams coming true. You were what they dreamed of. You're the vision that they had. And so I want you to know that we're here to support you on whatever path that looks like. And I know our ancestors and our leaders of the past would be so proud of you. So masi cho to the young people for making time to be here this week. And masi to everyone who supported me to come full circle and be here today too, because it was really a lot of people who created those moments for me that allowed me to be here and to do the work that I do now. Masi.
Thank you so much, Itwa. Now I'm going to ask from Nunavik Sivuniksavut, Nivi Snowball, who will come and share some remarks.
Hi. I just got asked if I could talk, so I'm going to speak freely on this topic. First of all, my name is Nivi Snowball. I'm from Nunavik and I'm a student at Nunavik Sivunitsavut. I am a two-spirited Inuk. And I have been studying the JBNQA alongside my class. I think as someone who grew up in my community in Kuujjuaq, we have been living under the JBNQA, all of us from Nunavik Sivunitsavut. And I think how it's held up is interesting. I am so incredibly grateful to all the politicians who fought for us, who made this happen. And I think we need to fight harder for it to be maintained in the way that they intended it. I think today, a lot of the things that were agreed upon in the JBNQA have not been maintained properly. For example, I think education is one of them. As someone who went to school in my own community, I do not think that it is adequate enough in raising the future leaders of Nunavik. I think our high schools don't have enough Inuktitut programming, we don't have enough Inuit teachers, and it's really unfortunate. I was fortunate enough to have a really great Inuktitut teacher my last 2 years of high school. Shout out Mary Joanne, I love you. But for every other year before that, I had lost my language because I wasn't being taught my language adequately. And that was a very big sense of shame for me. And I think it's a really big sense of shame for a lot of Inuit is our loss of culture, our loss of language. And that in part is due to the fact that it's not being taught properly to us in our education systems, in our own communities. I also think that there are other organizations and institutions that were put in place that have unfortunately adopted the wrong ideologies. For example, addiction and alcoholism has become way too normalized in our communities, to the point that these organizations are building buildings next to churches that are filled with alcohol. In my community, we have a beer store next to the church that was built by one of the organizations under the JBNQA. That is one of the worst examples I can give you, and the addiction and alcoholism in our community is so terrible, and it is truly heartbreaking because I myself, when I was younger, when I was only 12 and 13, and I struggled with addiction, I struggled with alcoholism, and I had to fight on my own to get out of that. So seeing my cousins go through the same thing as me and not knowing if they're going to be able to get out of it is truly terrifying. And knowing that these institutions that were supposed to help us are not doing their job properly and are not doing what they were intended to do all those years ago is even more heartbreaking. It is quite terrifying to tell these hard truths in front of you because I hold so much respect for what was done with the JBNQA, but we have to talk about its upkeep. We have to talk about these things that are wrong with the current system. We need more Inuit youth to speak up about these issues. We need more Inuit youth to be taught how to be leaders, how to speak in their own language proudly, show their culture proudly. As a pale-skinned Inuk, I struggled a lot with, my cultural identity because I always felt very invalidated because I was never taught the proper cultural ways, even if I grew up in my own community. And I had to fight to reclaim my identity, to tell myself, I am Inuk and I am here and I come from a long line of strong ancestors, as well as I come from a long line of Inuit activists. My great-grandmother, Ginny Snowball, my grandfather, Bobby Snowball, and my father, Ito Snowball, are all people who have fought immensely for Inuit of Nunavik. And I'm extremely proud and extremely grateful to be part of this family, and I really want to pursue their dreams for our community. So, yeah, I am really honored. First of all, I want to thank on behalf of Nunavik Sivunitsavut for having us here. This is a really great opportunity. And to continue, I'd like to say that there are things in the JBNQA today that are still really great, like institutions like Hutjit, which are working directly with Inuit youth that are helping us and learning. And our class was flown to Inukjuak to do a negotiation simulation, so treaty negotiation simulation. And I think more opportunities like that for youth of every nation would be immensely beneficial for everyone. Because when you build up your youth to be these strong leaders, everyone always says, the youth is our shot. The youth is our next generation. This is who is going to fight for us. These are our leaders of tomorrow. But you have to teach us how to be those leaders. You have to show us. You cannot expect that without proper education of our culture, of our traditional ways. This is just what I really want to emphasize, and having these opportunities like the treaty simulation, that was so beneficial, and I think it really taught us what to expect and what to see in the future when we are sitting there in front of the government of Quebec and negotiating our treaty. So I am really grateful for that opportunity, and I'm really grateful to be attending Nunavik Sivunitsavut. I have been learning a lot about my culture and my language, and I feel more connected to my Inuit identity than I ever have before. And I hope it's the same for my classmates. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Nakomi mariaduk nivi upin nakputit. I'm now going to call upon Ethan Joseph to provide his remarks.
Uklamah, Ethan Joseph, Histak Shiklah, Hetatsu, Yutluathat, Ahukura Umiksu, Stella George, Ahukwa Nuiksu, Les Joseph. My name is Ethan Joseph. I come from Hetatsu, Uklua First Nation on Vancouver Island in BC. I'm part of the Monmouth Treaty that was signed in 2011, along with 4 other New Channel nations. I recently started working for my nation full-time as a youth support worker and a Warriors coordinator. I was able to do this because my nation, Uklua First Nation, helped fund me through post-secondary for 3 years as I got a diploma and a certificate. And I was incredibly thankful. Moving away to the city and not having that support, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I moved to Victoria, and prices there are incredibly, incredibly high. As a youth support worker, I started doing this work part-time 10 years ago, and I'm now seeing youth that I work with when I first started going on to graduate soon. They're just about to graduate, the youth that I first started working with, and they are all now looking at post-secondary, which is amazing, and I can't wait to see them succeed. Part of my job as a Warriors coordinator is taking our young men, our young youth, out onto the land to experience nature, to experience our own territory. And I'm constantly reminding them that this is our territory and it is our responsibility to take care of this and manage this. Recently, we had to negotiate the rights to hunt for seal again, which we used to do traditionally. And within a week or two, we were out there, out on a boat and hunting seal just like that. We had adults and mentors who had done it in the past when they were younger. And then I also brought out some youth to join us to watch and observe and learn. So they were watching on the boat. They watched us as they came with us as we went onto the rocks and like we're hunting for seal. They're right behind us. So they got to experience it firsthand. And then the adult mentor showed me, because it was my first experience as well, show me and the youth there, right out there on the land, how to process the seal, how to take it back home and take care of it there. We had a few more successful hunts where we took more youth out to show them what it's like, and then we served it to our community. With the Warriors program, that's what we do. And we show them how to be healthy young men. The motto of the Warriors program is prepare, plan, and protect. And that's what we do. Recently, we also had a daycare feast where the daycare hosted a feast for our young children. And we had months of preparation to show them how to dance, how to wear the regalia, how to put on a feast, and how to host guests that we invited as well to share dinner, how to share songs. And it was beautiful. We did this last year as well. But part of that daycare, it's our own daycare, the Quiet Seek Daycare Center. It's in our own community. It's mostly our own community members working in it, all mostly Indigenous as well. Yeah, and it was super, super powerful to see the youth out there, super excited. And recently, just before this, I was part of the youth treaty simulation with the Gordon Foundation. So I was out here early for a few days. And all the work that I do as a youth worker or as a Warriors coordinator, right? It's all part of treaty, like reminding them of the youth of the responsibility of what we're doing. This is our land. This is our governance. We can do whatever we want. And it's like weird joining full-time. Everything I asked for, like I asked my boss or, leadership or whoever, it's like, is it possible if we can do this? Can we try to figure this out? Can I try to get this going for the youth? And it's always yes, yes, yes. Do whatever you want. Figure it out, and then you can do it. So I'm constantly trying to remind the youth that as well. With the treaty, if we can figure it out, we can plan it out, we can do it. So now that I'm starting full-time, I'm looking at treaty. I think the youth treaty simulation would be tremendous for our communities. I was part of it. I learned a lot. I was really nervous about it at first. How would it play out? What role would we all take? You know, how serious are we going to get about it? But it got intense, and it was really exciting. And you know, I would love to be able to bring this to our home communities of the Malnuth Nations. I think that's the next step of teaching the youth the real importance, not just showing them, you know, what our responsibility is of land, but what is treaty? How do negotiations work? And when I was in Victoria, you know, for education, I was part of a bunch of different, you know, activist organizations. I was doing whatever I can. I felt I needed to. But when I came back home, I had a lot of youth ask me what that was like. You know, what would you do? You know, how often would you do it? Would you go to protests and all that? Asking all these questions, what it felt like. So the youth are interested. They want to learn. You know, they're asking me to take them out to protests. I don't know if I can. We'll see. Get them out on the front lines. But, you know, they're interested and they want to learn. So that would be great. Kleko, choo.
Thank you so much, Ethan, for your contributions. I'm now going to go to Nunavut Sivuniksavut and ask Paul McDonald to share his remarks.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me good? Okay. So my name is Paul McDonald, and I'm a second-year student at Nunavut Sivuniksavut. Nunavut Sivuniksavut is a college certificate program in Ottawa, and it is a 2-year program. And I come from Kogloktok, Nunavut, which is the western part of the territory, so closest community to the NWT border. I also had a classmate who is unable to present with me today, but I'd like to give her a shout out as she was a big contribution to the slideshow that I'll present to you guys today. So unfortunately, she could not be here, but giving her a shout out. Sorry, I don't know how this works. Just ignore this. This is very last minute, as I was not expecting to present alone, so just bear with me. So my presentation is on the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement and the implementation process and how Inuit youth are involved. So you can see up here, this is what we call the NS curve, Nunavut Sivuniksavut. We say NS for short, so we call this one the NS curve. And this curve depicts the Inuit story in Nunavut. You can see at the top of the curve there, it says Inuit society pre-Kadlunak. That is before the white man came up north, and this would be in the 1600s. And is at the top of the curve because this is when Inuit had full control, independence, and autonomy over their way of life. And you could see as whalers, missionaries, traders, they started to show up in the north around the 1600s. And the curve starts to go down as they are groups of outsiders that have come up north to change the Inuit way of life and have major impacts on Inuit. And as we go into the 1900s, there's the government era there, and this is the period of time when the Canadian government is starting to establish themselves in the north, specifically after the at the start of the Cold War, when Canada was nervous about their sovereignty over in the north, because before that they had never really established themselves. So there's a lot of historical events that happen throughout this time that have negative impacts on Inuit, our way of life, and our independence. And then as we get to the 60s, this is the lowest point in Inuit way of life. We have no rights, no political voice. So this is the time when our leaders had decided enough is enough. They're going to start to get organized and create these Inuit organizations to create a united voice for Inuit to speak up against the federal government. And as you can see here, the curve starts to go up. This is when political organizations for Inuit start to form, and they start negotiating with the federal government in talks of land claims or modern treaties, which was a new concept. And around this time, the federal government thought, like, this is ridiculous. Why don't we just stick to treaties? You guys get money, we get your land. And I will explain more about the up of the curve into today's society. And I'd just like to share this picture with you. This was taken in 1969 in Pond Inlet, Nunavut. And this is the SS Manhattan, a super oil tanker that was doing a test run throughout the Northwest Passage, because around this time, the discovery of the largest pool of oil in recorded history was in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. How many of you know about Prudhoe Bay? Okay, a few people. Maybe you guys should consider applying for Nunavut Siviniksavut to learn about it. I also like to share this picture with you because it's a very real representation of what life was like for Inuit in the late 60s. As I stated earlier on the NS curve, this was the lowest point in their lives. This picture depicts the southern government and all these oil companies, development industry companies coming up north, doing as they pleased, exploiting the Arctic's resources and lands and wildlife, and Inuit had no say whatsoever. They were never consulted. So this picture depicts the power imbalance between the south and the north. And you can see there's an Inuk standing there right in front of the oil tanker in defiance. Because even though we had no rights, nobody cared what we thought, Inuit were still resilient, as we had always has been. And so this is when we get into the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement. In 1971, Inuit Deparitsat of Canada was formed by Inuit and First Nation leaders to speak up against the federal government about how they have rights to their land and their way of life. ITC would start the negotiations with the federal government. These negotiations would go on for about 18 years, and eventually resulting in the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement being signed in 1993 between TFN, which is Dungavik Federation of Nunavut, and at this signing, they would become NTI, which is what we know as Nunavut Dungavik Incorporated. So the signing would be between NTI, the government of Nunavut, and the government of Canada. And to follow this, there was a 6-year implementation period before the government of Nunavut and the territory of Nunavut would be established in 1999. Along with the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, or NLCA for short, there's a few main provisions that our leaders had hoped to achieve. 50-50 management and power-making decision over wildlife and our resources within the Nunavut settlement area, how the lands and waters will be used, and representation of the majority of Inuit, which added up to about 85% in Nunavut. They wanted to reflect this percentage of Inuit population within the territory into our territorial public government. And over the last 25 years of our agreement, there have been some major achievements that our government has been able to achieve, but there have also been some struggles of implementing parts of the NLCA. And within the NLCA, we have 42 articles that define our Indigenous rights to our land and our way of life. And as I stated, Nunavik Dungavik Incorporated was created after the signing of the NLCA, and they are like the middleman between the territorial and the federal government. They ensure that both levels of government do their part to implement the NLCA and stay true to their words. As I said, there was a few struggles with implementing the NLCA, and to ensure that both levels of government would do their part, NTI had sued both levels of government in 2006 for not implementing the NLCA as they should have been. One of these major articles was Article 23. Sorry, before I get on to Article 23, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the negotiations from 1980 to 1993, our leaders negotiated with the federal government over Nunavut here, the territory. And what the government really wanted, the federal government, what they really wanted was for Inuit to give up their entitlement to extinguish their rights to the land. But Inuit knew from past treaties that this was not an option unless they got their own territory and their control over their way of life. As compensation for all the development and the destruction that have been caused in Nunavut, the federal government gave the GN $584 million in compensation money, but they paid it over a 14-year time span with interest. So it added up to about $1.17 billion after that 14-year period. But the federal government also stated that throughout the negotiations, the Inuit leaders had to pay some expenses. So it amounted down to $1.14 billion. And with that, the Nunavut Trust was created to manage this amount of money. And the way this is dealt with is that the Nunavut Trust holds that $1.14 billion and they invest it into markets and stocks to create revenue. And with that revenue, they give it to NTI, and NTI uses that money to fund the programs throughout the Nunavut territory. So it's a kind of insurance that there's a constant flow of income for Nunavut and the government to ensure that Inuit have programs such as food programs to keep our youth from facing so much food insecurity, which I'll get on into later. With the signing in 1993, the federal government, the territorial government, and NTI ensured that Inuit had their own territory and more control over their way of life. And this here is the example of what I mentioned earlier about the extinguishment clause. So the first paragraph you see up there, that's an example from the 1800s when the Crown or the federal government would sign treaties stating that the indigenous people of this land had to give up their rights to the land completely, to extinguish, to secede their land. And in the bottom paragraph here, you can still see that's what they wanted with the Nunavut government 100 years later. They wanted Inuit to give up their rights completely, their entitlement to the land. And now this is when we get into Article 23, as I mentioned, when NTI had sued both levels of government because they were not implementing the NLCA as they should have been. The reason Article 23 is so important is because this article is about Inuit employment within the territorial government. This article is to increase the amount of Inuit working in the government representative level, which as I said earlier is 85%. They are to maintain and ensure that 85% of the government is run by Inuit to ensure that decisions that were made for Inuit are by Inuit. But they were not able to reach this. And it was clear that this wasn't as our leaders had intended. They lacked the funding to provide education to fill these positions within the territorial government, and this was impacting Nunavummiut. Bilimaksaivik is the Federal Center of Excellence for Inuit Employment, which means they are responsible for the implementation, monitoring, and coordinating of Article 23 of the NLCA. This is a very important area of the NLCA because the education that is involved with this ensures that Inuit receive positions within government. And our leaders wanted to ensure that with this NLCA, it's not just about compensation money. It's about securing a future for the future generations of Nunavummiut, such as us today. And with that, we are still trying to ensure that our government is not just thinking about today, but the road ahead for our future generations. And this can be said with many of the articles like Article 5, which is about wildlife. And so there are some benefits, So how are youth involved within the NLCA? Programs like Nunavut Siviniksuvat is a really great example. Many of our leaders today have come out of this program. NS teaches Inuit youth about our education, our history, our politics, as well as the culture of our people. In Nunavut, throughout my education pathway, we never really touched on much cultural importance or even the NLCA. But coming here to Nunavut Siviniksuvat, I've learned so much more in 2 years than I ever did in the 13 years I attended public school in Nunavut. I'd just like to touch on that more about how Nunavut Siviniksuvat, is really creating a pathway to many future leaders within our territorial government and even the federal government. And I'd just like to end this presentation by going back to this NS curve here and talking about the incline of the graph here. So many of you might have heard about last year's devolution signing with NTI, the GN, and the GOC. This is another step to ensure that our future generations and our territory are in good hands. The devolution signing meant that the power over the lands and resources within Nunavut would transfer from the federal government to the territorial government. So that ensures that Inuit have more control over our land and what happens, and the decision-making that goes along with it. This is to ensure within the NLCA that the decisions made for Inuit are by Inuit. Thank you for your time, for listening to this presentation, and if you have any questions, just feel free to ask me. Unfortunately, I cannot do that here, but I will be in the crowd there.
Paul, we're concluding this plenary, this session, and I want to thank every speaker for the remarks that you provided today, especially, and I want to give a special shout out to the two who stepped up very last minute to join the panel. With a lot of respect, I know this is a room full of Indigenous leaders, but I will say that this session, I think, will be the highlight of my day. And I say this because I know as an Indigenous leader working on issues that are impacting our communities and trying to make life better for our community members, we are often faced with lots of despair and lots of hopelessness. And it's so important for us to remember why we do the work we do to implement our modern treaties. And being able to speak and spend time with youth always fills me up with great hope. And I think, to me, that's why this is a highlight. And when I think about youth, I always think about how Nunavut was negotiated by Inuit as young as 19. And so I know we often think about how youth are our future. Actually, youth are our present. And there are current leaders, and we can see that demonstrated by people who stepped up this morning, very last minute, with really clear ideas on how we can do a better job and how our modern treaties can be improved. So thank you very much.